Yes, that was me. Hey everyone, Taku here and I hope you're doing well. And in this video I wanted to share with you one of my most recent projects of capturing the beauty of the cherry blossoms at night. Now here in Toronto we have the cherry blossoms blooming anywhere from about mid-April to early May. We have a number of parks scattered in and around Toronto that have these cherry blossom trees that bloom each year. Now, I've captured these cherry blossoms many times in the past, so this year I wanted to try something just a little different. Now, just as a side note, cherry blossoms are one of Japan's most famous and loved flowers. They bloom anywhere from about late March to early April in Tokyo, Japan, and it is not uncommon to see families and friends scattered all around the fields picnicking under the blossoming trees. There is one thing the Japanese do that I've never seen here in Toronto, and that is lighting up the cherry blossoms at night. Most of the major parks throughout the entire country of Japan light up the cherry blossoms at night, providing views that are very different than what you would see during the day. Now this provides another chance and opportunity for people to view the beautiful cherry blossoms in a completely different light, so to speak. Inspired by the lighting of these cherry blossoms in Japan, I thought it would be fun to see how the cherry blossoms of Toronto and beyond looked lit up at night. Now, in preparation for this, I already had an idea or envisioned in my mind how these cherry blossoms looked at nighttime here in Toronto. I wanted them to be a little bit ethereal, mysterious, but still take center stage in the landscape that I saw in front of me. So I decided to light up the cherry blossoms with Nanlite's latest LED point source light, and that is the FC-120B that I have right here. And actually I did an unboxing video of this light that I will link up here as well as in the description below, and you can find out all the details of that light there. Now you might think you need very powerful lights to be able to light up the cherry blossoms all the way to the top of the trees, but what I found was actually on the contrary. You actually don't need that powerful a light, because the more power you have, you'll end up blowing out the cherry blossoms that are closer to the light. The beautiful part about this Nanlite FC-120B is that it is so small, as you can see, and it is very lightweight. And I also have the Nanlite's V-mount battery handle that you can attach to the light, and I will show you exactly how I did my setup. I just attach that there, attach the cable right to the back there, and you just take your standard V-mount battery. I have here the small rig VB99 Pro that I had. You attach it just like that, attach the D-tap cable onto the side right there, and there you go. That is my entire setup that I had for my Sakura lighting project at night. And one thing I do like about the setup is, first and foremost, it is very lightweight and small and compact and easy to use even with one hand. So I was running and gunning it, so to speak, all in one hand, and I had full power of this light up to 100% using just this one battery. So it was very convenient, and I was able to fully control the light to my liking. And although I was able to go up to 100%, I rarely ever did that at night, because I did find that even this was so powerful at night that I only needed a fraction of the power to light up the cherry blossoms at night. Depending on which tree I was trying to light up and how much of the tree I was trying to light up, I was anywhere from like 1% to upwards of maybe 10–11%, sometimes a little higher depending on if the density of the blooms were so dense that I wanted to light through those branches as well. So I went to several parks to capture this project, and I will show you all of the pictures that I took at the end of this video in a slideshow, but I will highlight only the ones that I took quick videos of. And first and foremost of these parks is Hyde Park. It is one of, if not the most popular park in Toronto for cherry blossoms in the springtime, even though there are other parks that have more cherry blossoms blooming in them. During the day, it can get very crowded with people enjoying the scene on the gentle slopes nearby. But at night, it's a completely different story. So at High Park, there were two images that I really wanted to make. And at the very end, I was really happy because I was able to come out with two images that I was really proud of. So the first tree that I wanted to light up was actually the one that had the most bloom on them. And that just happened to be the one at the very top of the hill next to that little building or structure that we all see there. That had the most beautiful bloom and was voluminous, and it was able to actually capture a lot of the cherry blossoms there. But I also wanted to capture the depth of the cherry blossoms, and in doing so, I needed to be able to carefully light up the cherry blossoms that were closer to me and have the cherry blossoms that were a little further away from me a little darker. And it was at this point when I realized that the Nanlite FC-120B was more than powerful enough to be able to capture even the top part of the cherry blossom tree that I was trying to capture. So for this instance, I was probably mostly working at about 1% light and shining at different intervals while I was doing the long exposure capture. Now, as you can see, there were many failed attempts at lighting the cherry blossoms because I had to figure out the proper power of the light, the distance I had to be from the tree, where to shine, and all that integrated into my long exposure. So for this project, my Nanlite FC-120B was outfitted with this 45-degree reflector. And I used this reflector because I wanted a beam angle that was narrow enough to be able to reach up onto the top of the trees. And this 45-degree reflector was able to do that. If I were to use this bare, for example, or even have a softbox, that would have spread out the light too much to the neighboring trees, and that's not the look that I was looking for. It was also really windy that day, so I didn't really want something really large on my light as I was running around lighting up the tree. So this 45-degree reflector was really compact and light that it actually served the purpose perfectly. Now, there is also one really big advantage of using this 45-degree reflector instead of something else much larger, and that is I was able to hide the light source away from the camera that was taking my picture. And to do that, I simply made sure that my light was actually in front of my body as I was lighting it up, and then my body was actually hiding the light source from the camera, so it did not actually see where the light was coming from. And if I did want to include the light source, all I needed to do was actually shine the light away from my body so that the camera behind me was able to capture the light coming out from this light. And I actually did it both ways, so you can see how it looks with the light trail of the light coming in from the light source as well as the light behind my body so that it covers from the camera behind me. Now I will note that these were all shot with my Nikon Z9 and the 14-24 f2.8 lens. And this first picture is actually really cool because I was able to capture that ethereal mood by subtly lighting just one of the trees that I was after. And I was able to keep the surrounding trees darker in the environment and only capture the subtle lighting of that one tree that I was after. And I did actually put this in Photoshop and correct it for perspective after the fact because I didn't want the slanting trees on the edges to be left slanted because of my 14mm lens. I wanted to straighten them up a little bit, so I did correct them for perspective in that sense. And I will also note that that night was actually a full moon, or close to full moon, probably about 98% full moon. So the moonlight actually affects the surrounding environment as well, and it actually lights up a lot of the environment. So you'll see that in the second picture right here. This is more of the environment of the High Park that I captured. And you can see that there's more of the trees and the foreground that is lit by the moonlight as well as my light that I was shining on the trees. Now in this one, I was trying to get after the trees that were lining the pathway, and as well as the pathway as well. So I wanted to give it a more of a leading line element where the sakura trees and the leaves were actually guiding your eye from the left to the right. So I did this in two ways. This first one has everything in it. The sakura leaves are actually lit up on the left hand side, and I did leave the trail of light from my light source, which was the Nanlite FC-120B. I purposefully captured the light source in that because I wanted to have that blue trail of light. So I was holding that light not in front of my body but outside of my body so that my Nikon Z9 was able to capture that. And I'll actually show you this a bit later as well, but I captured it both ways where I hid that light source in front of my body as well. But in this particular picture, I intentionally wanted to have most things lit up, which was the foreground element as well as the sakura trees. And this brings in a little bit more of a feeling that you're there inside the midnight hours of the park, even though it wasn't actually midnight. But you can see how there's nobody there. It's a very solemn feeling to it perhaps, but perhaps a little bit of liveliness from the sakura flowers that are gently lit up and not overblown by the light. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, this was also probably set to about 1 to 5%, no more than 5% at maximum, lighting this for about 10 seconds. So you can actually see that some of the cherry blossoms may have been a little bit blurred because of the wind that day. You can see here that I'm actually carefully lighting up certain areas of the tree while I'm running down that pathway. I did this a number of times because there were certain times when I actually missed some of the branches that I wanted to light up. Perhaps it was something on the top or something closer to the bottom that I missed lighting up. But you can see that it does take a little bit of trial and error to be able to capture the perfect moment the way you had it envisioned in your mind at first. So it is not a one-shot deal. I did do this a number of times, and it was actually an interesting experience to say the least. And you can see in this picture here is the one where I actually hid the light source in front of my body as I ran down that pathway. You can see how the sakura trees are actually lit up, but no more of the outside surrounding is actually light because I was trying to contain that light literally just up above, pointing up, so that it was only actually pointing at the sakura flowers and not really pointing it all around the place like I was doing it in the other picture. And now we're off to one of Mississauga's more popular parks, which is Kariya Park. This has one of my favorite cherry blossom trees in it because it is a blooming cherry blossom over a pond of water. Now, unfortunately, when I went, it was actually fairly windy again, so the weeping cherry blossoms were actually swaying in the wind. I wasn't able to capture it as well as I had hoped to. Not to mention that the park is right in the middle of the city center, so there are surrounding lights that are shining within the park environment itself. Let's look at that picture. You can see here that I was able to light up the entire tree just with this one FC-120B light. It is pink, bright pink, and it's because I did light up the cherry blossoms with my light, and then you can see the surrounding cherry blossoms are actually darker. This is a 5-second exposure, and at the same time you can see how I managed to expose the background apartment lights as well, which are very distracting. So there wasn't an actual composition that I was very happy with in terms of this park. I'll show you another picture right here. Now this picture here I was able to capture just the weeping cherry blossoms because I just moved over so that the apartment buildings were no longer visible in it. And as you can see, the weeping cherry blossoms are swaying in the wind for this 4-second exposure. And I don't mind the actual swaying because it increases the volume of the pink in the cherry blossom tree, so I don't actually mind that fact. On the bottom left hand side, we still do see the lights from the city center, and there's really not much I can do about that, as well as some of the stray branches from the neighboring trees. So overall, although I really love the beauty of this Kariya Park during the day, I found it a little bit difficult to be able to capture exactly the feeling that I wanted to capture with these cherry blossom trees. And now we move on to Burlington's Spencer Smith Park, where we have this picture that I envisioned, and I actually ended up getting what I envisioned, so I'm super happy with this outcome. So let's take a look there. Now here's that final picture where I have the subtly lit trees along the entire pathway of the cherry blossoms that we have here at Spencer Smith Park. And these are gorgeous cherry blossom trees that we have all lined up for probably I don't even know how many meters this would be, but perhaps 40-50 meters or so. And I wasn't exactly sure how this would turn out because the city lights were actually shining in the background, and I knew this beforehand, but I still wanted to capture the subtly lit cherry blossoms within this overall environment. And I was happy that the background city lights didn't shine as bright as I thought they would, and the cherry blossoms were actually taking center stage away from that background city lights. So I was really happy with how this turned out. Now this is a 25-second long exposure that I did with my Nikon Z9, as well as a 14-24 at 14 millimeters in order to be able to capture everything from the start to the end. What I ended up doing was actually running at full speed, carrying my light and shining it at an angle and running right from the beginning to the end in order to be able to capture and light up the entire tree length within that 25-second span. Now you can probably guess that I had many tries in this, and where perhaps the first shot I wasn't able to capture the end part of it. I ran too slowly, sometimes I ran too quickly, sometimes I didn't shine it in the right place, sometimes I accidentally turned the light off while I was mid-running because I was trying to fiddle with the settings there. I had to adjust some of the brightness levels as well because some parts of that tree forest line was denser than others, so the light actually could not pass through where it was most dense. So all of that I had to actually take into consideration, and you can kind of guess that I was running a number of times, and it got to the point where I actually had to rest a little bit between takes. And it was also a very fun time to be out there at night. There were a couple people who were actually watching me, wondering what in the world that I was doing, because all they saw when I was taking that picture was me lighting some portions of that tree as I was running there. So it was very interesting to see from an outsider's point of view, but at the very end, in this long exposure of 25 seconds, I was able to capture this one moment, and I loved it. This was exactly how I envisioned it, so I was super happy with the outcome. Again, after the fact, I did put this into Photoshop to correct for the perspective. I straightened it out so that the edges were not angular or tilting in towards the scenery, and I wanted to be able to capture the trees upright as I was capturing the light running through the trees there. So this was that final image. And I also do love the fact that you can see the stars up above in the sky where the blue hour is just beginning to end. So the blue isn't too vibrant as well, so that it doesn't take away from the cherry blossoms. And the stars are a little bit faint, but it adds enough of an interesting element to the openness of the sky on the top there. Now we move on to this picture where I actually started to look into the pathway of the cherry blossom, and this turned out fairly well. I didn't do as many shots or attempts as I thought I would have to have done, so I'm actually glad that this turned out well. This was a 10-second exposure shining right through the pathway. Again, I was running and shooting this light. I was actually panning this light left and right, so I was able to capture all sides of the pathway. and I was making sure that this was in front of my body so as not to capture the light inside the long exposure as well. You can see on the left hand side I did leave out a little bit of the blue because I managed to capture that when I started the exposure. I'm happy that I was able to capture the cherry blossoms evenly lit and none of them were blown out. You can see on the very far left it wasn't as lit as perhaps I wanted it to be, but it does add a little bit of depth in that one is in the shadows while the ones in the foreground are further brighter and whiter. And here's one more taken from that same pathway entrance. Now all I did with my 14 to 24 millimeters was tilt that lens and camera up so I'm looking directly up the canopy of the cherry blossoms right from the bottom of the pathway, and what I did was actually shone that light and ran into the pathway as I was shining that light. So this is the outcome of that. This was at 6 seconds and I was quite happy with this because I managed to capture much of that cherry blossom. So you can see there's an abundance, and you can see that it is actually a canopy of cherry blossoms going down through that pathway. And it is a very contrasting light or color to the surrounding bottom elements, which are blue and yellow and orange, from the lighting of the city that is directly on the side of this pathway. And there we have it. That is my project for lighting up the cherry blossoms at night. And all thanks to the Nanlite FC-120B, its portability, its compactness, and the fact that I can actually carry it with a battery pack. It enabled me to actually be able to complete this project and create that vision that I had in mind for these cherry blossom pictures. I hope you liked them. If you have any questions on this light or what I did in my project, please feel free to comment below and let me know what you think of the pictures. I'm going to leave you with a short slideshow of all the pictures that I took that I was happy with. I hope you like it. Thanks for watching my video. I'll see you in the next one. Take care.